thong. I reached out and rolled over at the same time. I grabbed a handful of red fur. Molly. Note: do not ask the author how the details of the following sequence of events were obtained. The explanation would only leave you more confused and dissatisfied than would any theory you could come up with from your own imagination. Experienced pet owners know that if your pet ever goes missing, the first step is not to panic. The vast majority of the time, the pet will simply find its way back home on its own. Molly knew this, so she hadn't been all that concerned when her male human first went missing 9 days ago. In the beginning, things had been in a general state of agitation everywhere Molly went, so she figured it had something to do with that. That was the day all of the people had been shouting at each other and running and falling down. It was hard to find a place to sleep quietly, but eventually she found a shady spot between two buildings, and she curled up in the shadow of one of those huge green boxes humans use to store their extra food. This one had some great-smelling poultry in it, maybe 4 or 5 days old, but those boxes were hard to get out of once you got into them, and she wasn't hungry. She had just eaten the rest of the discarded meal that her human had forgotten to give her the night before. What passes for language among dogs, made up mostly of a lavishly detailed sense of smell and a well-tuned but cautious sense of empathy for all living things, cannot be translated neatly into English. But if it could, the closest translation of Molly's name for her human, the one other humans called David, was meat smell. His breath always smelled like meat. Always, as if he had just eaten some recently, no matter when you encountered him. To a dog, that spoke of an awe-inspiring accomplishment. She was proud of Meat Smell's ability to always have access to such riches. She knew she had taught him well, but she also knew that Meat Smell was always getting confused. Molly knew that he couldn't look after himself, and that he depended on her. She guarded his house every night, keeping all of the predators and bad guys at bay. She sometimes let him pet her, feeling his stress and agitation melt away as he did so. She also kept dropped food picked up off the floor, and fished out the edible items when he would accidentally drop them into those big flimsy bags and take them out to the yard, where anyone could get them. Molly was certain that Meat Smell would not last more than a day or two on his own. On the evening of that day, the day when everything went wrong, Molly had woken up after dark, the hard ground having grown cold under her. It had started to rain a little. She made her way back toward home, but that took a long time. She kept having to stop and investigate smells. There was smoke that stung her nose everywhere she went. Things were burning here and there, and she knew that could not be good news because the humans were already riled up. When things started catching on fire, that rarely calmed them down. She had stopped and sniffed a patch of fresh blood, and the freshly dead human laying next to it in the rain. A little way down the road, she stopped and smelled another one, sniffing around where some of its insides had spilled out onto the ground. She got closer to her home, and there were several such people laying around, with parts separated and some burned up. One of them was very small. None of them were Meat Smell. She would have known that from far away. The smoke smell was here too. There was no fire now, but there had been recently. Now everything was just smoky and cold and wet. She went into the house because the door was open, and went right to her food and water dishes. It was all wrong. Everything was all black and twisted. Her water dish had water in it, but it was rainwater that tasted like smoke. There was no food in her dish at all. That is when she knew Meat Smell was in trouble. He would not forget food time. If he had forgotten to feed Molly, who knew how long it had been since he had fed himself? It was then that Molly had noticed that it was still raining on her as she stood over her bowls. This wasn't right. The wind was still coming in too. Where was the warmth and light and the endless food smells? She went looking for her bed, but even it was cold and wet and strangely flat. She couldn't get comfortable. She hated sleeping in the rain, and trotted around outside the house until she found the small entrance to the space under the floor where she sometimes went when she didn't want to be bothered. It was nice and dry and shielded from the wind. She curled up on the dirt and drifted off, deciding that if meat smell came back soon, she would let him sleep down here too. Light poured into the entrance to her sleeping spot, and Molly instinctively moved to go somewhere darker. But then she realized meat smell still was not home, and that he was probably somewhere scared and hungry and waiting for Molly to come get him. Molly went on the hunt. Tracking meat smell would clearly begin with the last spot where she had seen him, at the little building down the road where he always bought his rolls of spicy meat. She set off down the street under the morning sun. She was disappointed to see that the humans had not settled down one bit after a night's sleep. A lot of men who were all wearing the same clothes with big coverings over their heads were shouting at the other people who were all wearing different clothes, maybe telling them that they should all be wearing the same clothes too. There was a terrible bang and Molly flinched. Noises that loud didn't happen in the normal world. Only people could make sounds like that. One of the different clothed people fell over, and they weren't alive anymore. Molly ran to get some distance from the shouting people, then turned one last time to get a look. She had noticed something curious and had to double-check. One of the people in the different clothes crowd was not, in fact, people. He looked just like a person, but he was something else, just pretending to be one. It was the same for one of the same clothes people, and she got the feeling that the other same clothes people did not realize this. This phenomenon was not new to Molly, but she always took note of it because it seemed to be the source of a lot of anxiety for Meat Smell and his friends. Molly hurried down the street and arrived at the tiny spicy meat building. No one was there at this time in the morning, but the place was bursting with smells. Not just all of the exotic meat the place cooked in big heaping piles, but of people. Molly sniffed the ground, making a full circle of the hard, cold surface around the building. She picked up the scent of Meat Smell, and the angry man who was trying to hurt Meat Smell and John. She followed the scents right to the narrow door, now standing open. She sniffed her way into a little room full of items that were not food. She sniffed and sniffed, in an instant learning the long and dramatic story of a possum who had died nearby a few days ago. Then, someone stepped in the juices that leaked from his body. Then, they tracked it into this room. Then, a cat slept in here not even 1 day ago. Molly was so distracted by the drama of the tiny room's floor that she failed to notice that the sun had gone away. She turned around and went back outside, only to realize she was no longer at the little building. She was now looking at a flat expanse of pavement, exploding with fresh smells. Blood, sweat, smoke, terror. Molly had sniffed and sniffed, taking it all in, replaying through her nose the story of scared men killing other scared men. There! Meat Smell had been here. The scent led off toward where lots of the same clothes men were gathered. Meat Smell was not among them. There was a fence that went both ways as far as Molly could see, and she sensed that Meat Smell was on the other side. So she just needed to find a way in. Shouldn't be a problem. Molly went and found a sunny spot, and curled up and went to sleep. It took a full week to find her way in. In that time, she was chased by some of the same clothes people and other dogs, and was almost hit by cars more times than she could remember. But she made it, inside the big building full of terrible smells, layers upon layers of ancient sickness and slow death. Now she was curled up next to Meat Smell, and it wasn't raining on them, and everything was back the way it was supposed to be. She fell into a deep sleep inside this huge building full of anxious and tired people, many of whom she noticed were not really people. 4 hours until the massacre at Firth Asylum. John had lost track of how many consecutive days he had woken up not knowing where he was. This place was full of people and echoes and creaky boards and mold. Someone was shouting at him to wake up. He sat up on the cot, and the first thing he saw was one of the terrifying Darth Vader guys holding a machine gun. John thought, oh, right, it's this bullshit still. 2 spacemen surged forward and lifted John off his cot and took him roughly out of the gym and into an old shower room covered in ancient chipped tiles held together by mildew. John half expected to see a dozen naked men in black space helmets snapping towels at each other. Instead, he found himself alone. The long, dry shower room now piled high with boxes of rubber gloves and syringes and trash bags and every other thing. He was alone for 10 minutes until he was joined by, "Detective Falconer, shouldn't you be wearing a spacesuit?" Falconer was wearing his street clothes, jeans, a black turtleneck, and an empty shoulder holster under his armpit. Cowboy boots, little bit of beard stubble. John wondered if the guy would walk from one end of the street to the other without winding up covered in bitches. Falconer said, "A suit wouldn't help, would it?" "Might buy you a few seconds. Where's Amy?" "Who?" "Dave's girlfriend, redhead, only one hand. They snatched her up, both of us. But I think she got away. They don't seem to know where she is. I don't know if she's in town or didn't see her." "What about Dave?" "I can ask, but they won't tell me either way. Because you don't work for the CDC. Does this shit look like the CDC to you? You see what those guys were wearing? What they were packing? No, they're not CDC, and I'm not one of them. I'm being processed for infected, just like you. I turned myself in. I got them to let me talk to you because I said you might have information. But when we're done, both of us will get tossed over the fence down at the hospital. And it sounds like nobody comes back out of there." "You turned yourself in? Great plan you had there, detective." "I'm really trying to restrain myself here. You understand? This all happened because of you two shitbirds." "Man, fuck you. I don't think Dave made it out. Did you know that? I'm pretty sure he got his brains blown out when everything went bad. Or if not, they got him after shit went to hell. Either way." "Well, I'm sorry if that's true. But I can say that I don't know that to be true either. Some people were killed in that first round of riots, but I never heard that he was among them." John shrugged. "But none of this is my main point." Falconer moved to a spot where he could see the gym from where he was standing, making sure nobody was close enough to listen. "My point is, I've seen everything I need to see in here, so I figure that instead of rotting in their quarantine, I might as well get to the bottom of this and save the world." John stood up. "Now you're talking! Don't get excited. If I think you can help me, I'll get you out of here too. But you have to prove you can help me first." John sat. "Okay, fine. Want me to show you some karate, or—" "I watched both of you go into a door at a taco stand and not come back out. Where did you go?" "To a construction site outside of town." "How?" "Magic door. No, seriously, don't get mad. The door is magic. It's not my fault." "But it didn't work for me. And if the illegal aliens they got manning the grill at that place go through the back door, they're not gonna wind up outside town." "Correct. Neither will most other people. Me and Dave can do it. So can some other people around town. They're the ones who built the doors. We just stumbled across them." "Doors? There's more than one?" "Yeah, they're all over." "And who are these people who put them there?" "We'd love to find out. They're very well funded and very powerful, and they dabble in weird shit. They're also almost certainly the people responsible for this outbreak. Which, as Dave tried to explain to you, is the work of invisible monsters. I think that tenant guy is with them. He has that vibe." "A few days into this situation, CDC, military, everybody pulls out and this new agency, Reaper, sweeps in. They got all the right equipment and all the right training for this exact thing. And nobody has heard of them before." John shrugged as if to say, "Sounds about right." "These guys, the ones you say are behind this, do they do anything else other than build magical doors and monsters? I'm having a little bit of trouble figuring out how they make money off that." "Dave thinks the monster stuff is a side effect, an accident. He thinks they're experimenting under the table with the door stuff, quantum teleportation or wormholes or however they do it, and that when they started dicking around with the fabric of space-time and dimensions and so on, weird shit started leaking through from, other dimensions or wherever they come from. But the stuff that came through don't think of it as just animals that run around biting people. Some of it is intelligent. Super intelligent, maybe. Dark shapes, like ghosts. John could tell from Falconer's face that he was losing him. Detective, all this stuff I just said, we didn't just fill this in with our imagination. We've had encounters here and there. Stuff has leaked out from inside the operation. We look like a couple of assholes, but Dave has actually worked really hard to put this together. And you've seen enough weird shit in your time here to give us just a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. These people, you think they're part of the government? I think that when the government comes to investigate something that goes down here, these guys can make some calls and that shit just disappears. Cases get closed. Also, they've been around a while. Stories about this town go back as far as the history books go. Maybe forever. What's so special about this town? Don't know. Maybe there's some kind of electromagnetic conditions that make it ideal for whatever it is they do. Maybe they just got a good deal on the land. Who knows? But what's so special about you and David? Why can you use the doors? Why can you see the monsters? Short answer, we're magic. Longer answer, he and I took a magic potion that gave us the ability. The longer still answer is that a drug hit the streets. Looks kind of like molasses or motor oil that hasn't been changed in a decade. The dealer was calling it soy sauce. You take it and you change instantly. The veil comes up off your perceptions. When you're on it, the first few hours, you're like a fucking demigod. You can slip through time, space, unlock the mysteries of the universe and shit. Then you come down and you feel normal again, but some of the effects are permanent. You become a member of the club. That drug, it came from these people, right? All the weird shit comes from them? Yeah. You have any of it left? The drug? You don't want to take it. It kills 99% of the people who come in contact with it, mostly in gruesome ways. The dealer who sold it to me, they found him splattered on the walls of his trailer. But in answer to your question, yes, we do have some of the soy sauce left. Where? I'll take you to it. No bullshit. But we gotta get out of here first. I agree. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that they're not gonna agree to release us, even if you wave your badge at the dude guarding the door. Falconer said, "You're right, for once. I don't know if you realize it, but these assholes picked the single most fucked up building in a 100-mile radius in which to set up their ad hoc HQ. They have generators in the parking lot and power cables draped through windows and boxes stacked everywhere. I'm thinking they have not had time to work out exactly what they would do in the event of something unexpected, like a fire. We're totally on the same page here. Let's burn this shit down." Falconer closed his eyes, let out a steadying breath and said, "No, we just need some smoke. Enough to make them go through the process of carefully moving all of these patients and staff and shit out of the building. All those guys in their bulky-ass spacesuits tripping over cables, patients trying to escape. And in the confusion, we slip away. Now, if I go out there now and occupy as many staff as I can with some ruse, do you possess the resourcefulness to sneak away and create a nice, smoky, but controlled fire in a trash can somewhere, without fucking it up?" John looked him dead in the eye and said, "Throw some rubber gloves in there, it'll smell just like an electrical fire." 3 hours, 45 minutes until the massacre at Firth Asylum. I marched Molly into the hallway, intending to ask if anybody had seen her around before. Hell, maybe she'd been here from the start and we just missed each other. I got my answer without asking. As soon as we stepped into the hall, a dozen people gathered around and said, "How'd you get a dog in here?" Molly wasn't talking. She just panted and wagged her tail and let everyone pet her. She was filthy, mud caked on her legs and chest. Was there a spot to dig under the fence unnoticed? Both fences? It only took 10 minutes for word to filter down to the yard, and for Owen to call a meeting, because apparently he could do that in his role as only guy with a gun, according to Robert's rules of order. Shortly thereafter, at least 100 people were huddled in the yard around the fire pit. The night air was cold as shit, so we all huddled around the smoldering coals and blackened, smoking rib cages, rubbing our hands together and hoping nobody was secretly taking a picture. Kinda hard to run for office later with a photo circulating of you warming your hands over a pile of glowing skulls. Owen had the automatic in his hand, but wasn't threatening with it. In this setting, it seemed more ceremonial, like a gavel. He said, "I don't like it. It don't make sense. That's a big dog, and it ain't like a squirrel getting past the sensors and shit out there. Dog probably weighs 100 pounds. If it can make it through, a dude can make it through." I said, "Well, awesome. If there's a way in, there's a way out, right? Maybe there's a place you can dig under the fence after all, out of sight of the dipshit," interjected Owen. "We have been around and around that fence. It's all we got to do all day, bro. No, there ain't no good place to cross the fence. There ain't any storm drains. There ain't any big sewer pipes like in the damn Shawshank Redemption." I shrugged. Well, I personally observed this dog in town eating a burrito after the hospital was locked down. She was on the other side of that fence, and she didn't come in on the last truck. So, speaking of which, Owen said, "What are we supposed to do with it?" I said, "Why do we have to do anything? To be clear, there's no indication that dogs can get infected, right? So we're not worried about that end of it." TJ said, "Oh, dogs don't get it. Animals and kids, they don't get it." Owen said, "You bet your life on that? All of our lives?" I said, "So I'll check her mouth." "That ain't 100% neither." "So what? You want to put her down? She's our ticket out of here." "Our ticket out of here is keeping this place safe and secure until we hear the all clear. There ain't no reason in the world to make a jailbreak even if your dog leads us to a magical train platform that hauls us all to Hogwarts." Everyone stared at Owen until he said, "I told you, I got a kid. Fuck off." I said, "Your 'let's remain calm and stay put' speech would be a lot more convincing if you weren't giving it in front of a pile of burning skeletons. So we kill the dog because maybe she's not a dog and maybe she's some new kind of undetectable monster. We gonna use that same standard on the next human who walks through those gates? Where does that shit end, Owen? Government shows up to give the all clear and it's just you and a mountain of bones?" Owen had no rebuttal for this, and I have to be honest, I detected relief in his face. He didn't want to have to shoot a dog. "She monsters out, and it's your ass." Owen stuffed the gun into his pocket, and apparently that signaled that the meeting was adjourned. The Reds huddled among each other, and the Greens headed back inside. I walked with TJ and said, "There's something else to this, but I don't want to jump to any conclusions or anything. Molly really belongs to my girlfriend, Amy. I think Molly showing up here, it's not coincidence. I think she was sent here as a signal to me. John and Amy, hopefully just John, I guess, with Amy in some safe place. I think one or both of them are out there and are trying to bust me out or trying to show me how to sneak out." "So, what does that mean?" "Means I have to figure out what the plan is, but I feel like they definitely have a plan." Somewhere beyond the fence, an explosion lit up the sky. 3 hours, 30 minutes until the massacre at Firth Asylum. John sprinted across the asylum parking lot, screaming, "Shit!" Black smoke poured through the house-sized hole that had been blown in the gymnasium wall. Screams and gunshots chased him. Nearby, a car windshield shattered. There was another explosion, and the shockwave threw John to the ground, scraping his palms on the pavement. Falconer grabbed the back of his shirt and yanked him to his feet. They made it to the Porsche, parked a block away, and 10 seconds later were tearing through the streets of Undisclosed, drawing the attention of every gun-toting spaceman they passed. And there were a lot of them. Clusters of them seemed to populate every corner. Falconer growled, That was liquid oxygen, dumbass. That's why those tanks had those huge orange warning stickers all over them. They use it in rockets. I didn't know. Jesus. You didn't know oxygen burns? Where did you go to school? Here. Look around. It's a shithole. The Porsche smashed through wooden barricades set up in the street, and on the other side was a ghost town. Broken glass in the streets. Garbage piled on the sidewalk. The Porsche turned down an alley, and John realized what was crunching under the tires like gravel were brass shell casings from machine guns. John said, "Holy shit. Is everybody dead?" There's a 24-hour curfew outside the green zone. Inside those barricades we drove through, they've still got military doing foot patrols. But out here it's locked down. Nobody on foot. Just armored Humvees making sweeps every now and then. Anyone seen roaming the streets out here is presumed infected and either shot or hauled off to quarantine, depending on how far gone they are. Christ, how is that legal? Falconer shook his head. I've never seen anything like this in all my days. Everybody you see inside town, all hazmat suits, all the vehicles, that's all Reaper. Everybody else has withdrawn outside of town. If we turned right here, we'd eventually run into a Reaper cordon at city limits. Get past it, and you're in the dead zone. It's a 5-mile wide ring around the city where nobody is allowed. All the houses in that ring have been evacuated. All the businesses shut down. Reaper patrols it in armored vehicles. It acts as a vacuum seal between the city and the outside world. At the end of the dead zone, you find the National Guard. I'm talking tanks here, rows of them. Guns aimed at the city like they expect Day of the Dead to come pouring out at them at any moment. Falconer pulled off into the yard of an abandoned house and parked in a spot behind the garage where the car wouldn't be visible from the street. He continued, "But you see what they've done? What the outside world knows about what's going on in town is only what Reaper tells them. There is no one else. All the phones are jammed. No news crews, no internet access. The military, they're on the other side of 5 miles of no man's land. Whatever the people are hearing, whatever the government is hearing, comes from Reaper. It's their show." John said, "And I'm pretty sure at least one of the guys in charge is crazy." "I'll agree with that assessment. Let's just say that I've heard some shit about what goes on in that asylum." John said, "Well, what now?" "We wait to make sure they're not still after us. I'm hoping the shitstorm you left behind back there makes us a low priority. They gotta get containment back in place first." John said, "Can we get to Dave's place? Are they guarding it or anything?" "Why would they? They would if they knew what was there." Falconer said, "The drug, you mean? The soy sauce." "Let me apologize ahead of time, Detective, because shit is about to get weird." 3 hours, 15 minutes until the massacre at Firth Asylum. Amy was about to explode. She didn't get mad often, and it took a lot. But once the pin on that grenade had been pulled, there was no containing it. This was something she had in common with David, though he didn't realize it. Amy's mom, back when she was alive, had said God had made sure to give her brother Jim all of the size and Amy all of the temper. He had been as big as a bear, but was always the voice of reason in an argument. The only time she had seen him fight, it was to defend her. Amy was literally less than half of his size, but had that grenade inside her. Her mom called it her Irish, as in, "Now calm down, your Irish is coming out," which, ironically, made Amy furious. Wasn't that racist or something? But the look on Josh's face right now, it was about to get all Irish up in here. "We have to go now." "We should have left 2 hours ago." "Fine, you don't care about David. You don't care if he gets eaten by a zombie or burned up to ashes, but who knows how many more are in there? Women, kids, who knows? We have to get them out, as many as we can." Josh, not making eye contact, said, "I totally understand you're upset, but We have to be smart about this. Mike and Ricky aren't here. They're helping their families move before the quarantine swallows this place. And I told you about Zach. He's got food poisoning. He's already in bed. That's 3 guns we're short, but tomorrow... Oh, for the love of... You know what you are? All of you? Children. Little kids playing pretend with toys. You've spent years obsessing about this, and now it's here. Much to everyone's surprise, it's actually here. And it's tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. Tomorrow when the sun comes up. Tomorrow when the weather's warmer. Tomorrow when we have more help. When things aren't so bad. When everything is aligned just right so that there's no risk of anything bad possibly happening. Calm down. Screw you! Amy shrieked it, a sound that tore a hole in the air. Grenade, Amy, watch it. You want to sit here in your little fantasy, your little suburban womb with your laptop in your little clubhouse, rubbing oil on your guns and congratulating yourself on how brave and strong you turned out to be in the stupid zombie war fantasies that play in your head. You're not a man. You're a boy. All of you. You're little boys because you choose to stay little boys. You don't become a man until you wake up one day and realize that today the world needs you to be a man. Josh, so help me. If you don't step up and become a man right now, people will die. Tonight, not tomorrow. He didn't answer. He had his MacBook open and was fiddling around with the touchpad, and he had that look on his face that had pulled Amy's pin. A mask of feigned nonchalance. It took practice to come up with that look. Somebody who had been shamed so many times that he'd adapted to simply never showing it, rather than changing to not do things he was ashamed of. She wanted to slap him, and slap him, and slap him. Amy, all I'm saying is, ah! Amy bent over and screamed at the floor. She didn't know what else to do. Mom was right. If the Lord had given her Jim's body, she would have thrown this kid through the windshield of the RV. Fine, she said. All I want you to do is give me a ride down there. Drop me off at the barricades. I'll figure out a way to get across. I'll figure out a way to find David and anyone else who needs help in there, and I'll figure out a way to get them out, and if I don't, then I will die. And that's okay, because while I'm dying trying to save the people I love, you'll be back here in your cocoon, playing your zombie video games and jerking off, and dying would be better than watching you do that. The side door of the RV ripped open. A short, dusky kid, who Amy remembered was called Fredo, leaned in and said to Josh, "Did you hear?" I couldn't hear anything over her. Outbreak inside the Reaper Command Center. All hell broke loose. There was an explosion. The building's on fire. All their containment breached. Infected pouring out of their holding area. Holy shit. Ogza says fire trucks headed one way, then 10 minutes later, Reaper were going the other. Pulling out. Leaving the green zone. Leaving everything. They're pulling out of undisclosed. Looks like it. Amy said, "So what does that mean?" Josh said, "It means all the manpower is now devoted to keeping anyone from leaving the city, and anybody left behind is now on their own." Fredo said, "Ogza put out a call for assistance, anybody and everybody with a gun. They said this is about to go from a Class 2 to a Class 3 zombie outbreak." Amy said, "Is a Class 3 the one where you guys actually do something?" Fredo said, "They said they can get us inside the city. They got friends on the cordon, but that's only until the feds change the guard rotations." Josh hesitated, studying the ridiculous collection of guns on the wall. Finally, he said, "Tell everyone it's a go. The feds shit the bed, and now it's up to us. We roll in 30 minutes. 3 hours until the massacre at Firth Asylum." John couldn't help but notice that while all of undisclosed appeared to be the aftermath of a post-Super Bowl riot in Detroit, if you had woken up in Dave's neighborhood, you wouldn't have noticed any difference. Same old busted windows and same months-old trash bags sitting on porches. John found this comforting. The big change, of course, was where Dave's little 1,100-foot bungalow had previously stood. There now wasn't much of anything. Just a floor supporting the black frames of 2 burned-out walls and piles of wet, charred debris. blackened drywall and 2x4s and roofing and gnarled wiring. John really didn't feel anything about this, one way or the other, and not just because he had been the one to burn it down. John didn't get sentimental about houses. Maybe it was because he bounced around so much as a kid, thanks to 3 different divorces, but he liked to think it just made more sense to not get attached to things. The memories didn't get burned up with a house or transferred to new owners if it got sold. A house was just wood and nails. Falling in love with a house or a car or a pair of shoes, it was a dead end. You save your love for the things that can love you back. Falconer wanted the Porsche out of view in case Reaper came by or somebody tried to steal the stereo or something. One of the abandoned houses down the street had left its garage door open, and Falconer pulled in. John personally thought it was wiser to have the car within lunging distance in case they needed to make a desperate getaway, but apparently desperate getaways were what other people did in Falconer's world, while Falconer chased them and told them they had the right to remain silent. Once parked, John found the prospect of opening the car door and stepping out into the night erased any illusions he had that this was the same old neighborhood. In the rearview mirror, John saw curtains rustle in the dark house across the street. An infected? Or somebody hunkered down, scared that John and Falconer were infected? Who knows? If it was some terrified refugee crouched with a shotgun, John was hoping that the Porsche would put them at ease. No zombie's gonna drive a Porsche. There you go with that zombie bullshit. They eased the heavy garage door down, closing it behind the Porsche. They headed down the sidewalk, at which point John thought he saw somebody slip around a corner, but then realized he didn't. He thought he heard footsteps, but it was a windy night, and the sound was a strand of Christmas lights from last year tapping against a window at the neighbor's place. Falconer asked, "The soy sauce, was it in the house when it burned?" "No, I'll show you." John was afraid Falconer would say, "Great, I'll wait here." But instead, Falconer led the way, striding into Dave's yard like a man with a huge gun. Falconer glanced this way and that, alert but not scared. John followed and made his way around the yard to find the tool shed hadn't burned. It was also still unlocked from when he'd grabbed the chainsaw the day everything went to shit. He reached inside and grabbed a shovel. He tossed it to Falconer. "The sauce is in a little silver container, about the size of a spool of thread. Inside is a really thick black liquid. When we find it, don't open it. Not only will the shit kill you if it gets on your skin, but it will come after you. Have you seen the blob? It's like that, only tiny. And when you say it'll kill you, you mean me, because you can handle it for some reason." "Yes, you'll see." "Uh-huh. And judging from the shovel, I assume you buried it?" "Yeah, around here somewhere. Don't look at me that way. I need you to do the digging. You'll see why. It's not deep. Now, the container is somewhere here in the backyard. I know where, but I'm not going to tell you. I want you to walk to a random spot, what you think is a random spot anyway, and dig down about a foot." Falconer didn't move from where he was standing. He plunged the shovel into the dirt right in front of his feet. 3 scoops and then, "Look, right there." Falconer looked down, and in the moonlight saw the glint of brushed steel poking out from the mud. "All right, how did you do that?" "I didn't. It did. The sauce. When we buried it, Dave just threw the shovel like a javelin and said wherever it landed, that's where we'd bury it. That's where it landed. Where you're standing. Because the soy sauce wanted it to land there. Because it knew you'd be standing there a year later." "It knew. So the sauce is alive." "Yes, sir." "And now you're going to swallow some of it." "That's the least painful way, yeah." "And you have no idea how it does what it does." "Let's just say it's magic." "Let's just say that I need a little more explanation than that if I'm going to go along with this." John sighed. "Okay, have you heard of nanotechnology?" "Yeah, microscopic robots, right?" "Right. And imagine they can make millions of these robots and embed them in a liquid, so that you now have a liquid infused with the power of all these machines. Got it? All right. Now imagine if, instead of tiny robots, it's magic. John dug the bottle from the mud with his fingers. Stand back. If you take that shit and you go into a seizure or cardiac arrest, I'm leaving you here. Detective, if I take this shit and it looks like the trip is going bad, fucking run. John squeezed the bottle in his hand. He thought he heard the footsteps again, but decided he needed to stop falling for that at some point. He took a deep breath and said, "All right, here goes."